There is a sound that lives beneath the noise of every ordinary day, a frequency so ancient and so precise that it cannot be manufactured by human hands. And you have been carrying it inside your chest since before you had the language to name what you were. It pulses like a second heartbeat, quieter than the one your doctors can measure, but infinitely more powerful. And for years, you have felt it pushing against the walls of circumstances that seemed determined to bury it. You have stood in rooms where nothing about the atmosphere confirmed what you sensed about yourself. You have watched doors close in slow motion, felt the air shift when you entered certain spaces, tasted the particular bitterness of effort that produced no visible result, and all of it, every single ounce of that disorientation, was engineered. Not by chance, not by your own shortcomings, but by something that recognized your signal long before you understood what you were broadcasting. The persecution you have felt in your waking hours is not paranoia, it is perception. And the moment you stop apologizing for that perception and start reading it as intelligence, everything about your position changes. You were not brought to this moment by accident. You were navigated here by a strategy older than the opposition that tried to reroute you, and what you are about to receive is not a reward for surviving. It is the delivery of something that was written before the attack ever began. You have had a dream that did not feel like a dream, a vision that played out inside sleep with a terror too mechanical, too deliberate to belong to your own subconscious imagination. You are running, and your legs are made of something heavier than bone, heavier than fear, something that vibrates with a resistance that feels intentional, like the ground itself is collaborating with an invisible force to hold you in the same place, while the thing chasing you closes the distance with terrifying ease. Your lungs perform the motion of breathing, but no air actually moves. Your mouth opens to scream, and the sound that should come out simply does not exist. This is not your mind processing the anxieties of the day. This is your spirit registering a real-time spiritual pressure campaign being run against your frequency in the dimension where dreams and warfare share the same geography. The physical sensation is unmistakable once you know how to read it. A deep compression across the sternum, a heaviness in the lower limbs that lingers into the waking hours, a disorientation that coffee cannot cure because it has nothing to do with your body's need for rest. The intrusive thought that follows this dream is always the same in its core. You are not fast enough, not strong enough, not built for the distance required. That thought is not your voice. That thought is a planted transmission designed to make you interpret divine delay as personal inadequacy. The spiritual action occurring in this moment is a principality assigned to wear down your endurance, to make the race feel unwinnable before the second wind arrives. The primitive memory this warfare activates is the first time someone important to you communicated, through word or action or devastating silence, that your reach exceeded your grasp. Darkness is sophisticated. It catalogues your wounds and replays them in the theater of sleep where your defenses are low. But here is what the dream does not show you. You never stopped moving. Even with lead in your legs, you were still in the race. Heaven is not watching a man or a woman collapse. Heaven is watching someone refuse to stop, and that refusal is the very signature that triggers the next level of intervention. You won't defeat this attack alone. Breaking these emotional hexes requires a higher code, which is exactly why I just released the 3 keys to a prosperous life trilogy, whose unlocking link is in the pinned comment. Access it before the fog blinds you again, because what follows in this revelation will require every ounce of clarity you can gather, and you need to be standing in your full stature to receive it without flinching. The person stood in front of you and smiled, and something in the back of your nervous system registered an anomaly that your conscious mind immediately dismissed because you had been taught that discernment was arrogance and that reading people was judgment. So you overrode the signal. You accepted the compliment they delivered with precise surgical warmth, and you watched their eyes while they spoke, and the eyes did not match the mouth. There was a flatness behind the performance, a calculation lurking beneath the warmth, like a predator who has learned to mimic the mannerisms of nourishment. They told you that you were gifted, and they meant it, but not the way generosity means something. They meant it the way an appraiser means something when they study a painting they intend to acquire and never display. The poisoned compliment is one of the most ancient weapons in the narcissistic arsenal because it bypasses your defenses through the very door you have been trained to leave open, your hunger for legitimate affirmation. You have been misunderstood for so long that when someone speaks the language of recognition, your spirit rushes toward it before your discernment has the chance to analyze the source. The physical sensation of a poisoned compliment is a warmth that turns cold within hours, an inexplicable deflation that follows a moment that should have felt elevating. The intrusive thought is the confusion that comes next. Why do I feel worse after being praised? And darkness leverages that confusion to make you question your own perception, to gaslight yourself into believing that the cold you felt was your own inability to receive. The spiritual action here is a direct transmission of covetous energy, which in the realm of spiritual warfare functions like a hex woven through the delivery mechanism of admiration. The narcissist who delivers this kind of recognition is not always consciously aware of the transaction occurring. Some are not. But the spiritual mechanics operate independently of their awareness. Covetous admiration attached to your name in a ritual of false praise opens a legal doorway in the spirit realm that can be exploited by the entities that feed on stolen anointing. The primitive memory this activates is the first time your excitement about something you created or achieved was met with an enthusiasm that somehow made you feel smaller rather than celebrated, when someone's response to your win was calibrated perfectly to remind you of their relevance to your success. Heaven's tribunal looks at this moment and records it, not as your failure to discern, but as your spirit's courage to remain open in a world designed to close you down. And the divine promotion embedded in this wound is extraordinary. Every time your signal was targeted through false admiration, your discernment was being calibrated at a higher resolution. Until now, you can feel the difference between genuine celebration and spiritual larceny from across a room before a single word is spoken. They started using your language. You noticed it first as a small thing, a phrase you had introduced into conversation that began appearing in their vocabulary. Then, a perspective you had labored to articulate began surfacing in their presentations, slightly repositioned, stripped of its origin, wearing new clothing but built on the architecture of your revelation. Then the aesthetic, the approach, the branding of your interior life began appearing in their public expressions, and you felt something that you were not allowed to name without being accused of insecurity. But what you felt was accurate. What you witnessed was not inspiration, it was appropriation of a spiritual identity, and it operates in the realm of narcissistic mimicry with terrifying precision because the person copying you does not only want what you carry, they want the source of what you carry. They cannot replicate anointing through behavioral mimicry, but the enemy has convinced them to try, and the attempt itself constitutes a form of spiritual aggression against your frequency. The physical sensation of being copied by a covert narcissist is a disorienting loss of ground. Like the earth beneath a unique identity is slowly being eroded by someone building a counterfeit landmark in the same coordinates. The intrusive thought is devastating in its simplicity. Maybe I am not as original as I believed. If someone else can do what I do, then what makes me essential? This is exactly where darkness wants your mind to land, in the quicksand of comparative insignificance. The spiritual action occurring when your identity is being mimicked is an attempted frequency hijack, a bid to blur the divine signature on your life by flooding the atmosphere with a counterfeit version of your sound. The primitive memory activated here is the first time someone took something from you: credit, recognition, belonging, and the adult world either validated the theft or asked you to be gracious about it. Heaven's tribunal records the theft. Every act of spiritual plagiarism is documented in the courts of divine justice, and the law that governs this realm is precise. What was stolen to simulate your anointing only amplifies the original. You cannot replicate what was forged in real fire by performing the motions near a candle. The divine promotion buried in this wound is the revelation that you carry something so rare, so specific, so undeniably original that darkness had to design an entire counterfeit operation around it. You are not dealing with a jealous peer. You are dealing with someone so spiritually impoverished that they have mistaken the container for the source. And heaven is allowing this display so that you understand, with no further doubt, what you are actually carrying. There is a specific hour in the early morning, usually somewhere in that corridor, between 3 and 5, when the darkness is at its thickest and your defenses are as low as they will ever be. And in that hour, you have felt it. The weight. Not a metaphorical weight, but a physical, measurable pressure distributed across your chest and sometimes across the entirety of your body that pins you between waking and sleeping in a state of conscious paralysis. You are aware of being in your bed. You are aware of the room around you. You can hear the environment operating normally, but you cannot move. Your limbs have been disconnected from your will, and beneath the physical paralysis, there is a presence, something that does not announce itself with drama, but makes itself known through an atmospheric density that is entirely distinct from ordinary silence. This is not a neurological anomaly, although science will offer you that framework to keep your mind from accepting the more accurate and far more consequential explanation. This is a spiritual assault conducted in the threshold state where your spirit is most exposed, and where the entities assigned to wear down your frequency can operate with the least resistance from your conscious defenses. The physical sensation is unmistakable to anyone who has experienced it. The crushing weight, the locked muscles, the desperate effort of a will that cannot translate intention into movement, and beneath all of it, a specific quality of dread that has nothing to do with personal fear and everything to do with proximity to something that should not be present in your space. The intrusive thought in this moment is primal. I cannot protect myself. I'm at the mercy of something I cannot see and cannot fight. This thought, if it takes root, becomes a trauma bond with powerlessness that darkness will harvest for months or years. The spiritual action occurring during sleep paralysis is a direct operation by assigned spiritual entities that have been granted legal access to your space through open portals, unconfessed agreement with the enemy's narrative about your identity, or the curses transmitted through the poisoned admiration and covetous attachments of those who envy your assignment. The primitive memory activated in this moment reaches all the way back to childhood experiences of helplessness, moments when your safety depended on someone who was not reliable, when your cry brought no response, when your need was visible and unmet. Heaven's tribunal is not passive in these moments. The spiritual record shows the assault and the endurance, and the divine promotion is staggering in its scope. Every night you survived what was designed to shatter your sense of spiritual agency, you were being initiated into an authority level that cannot be taught in any room, read in any book, or transferred by any human hand. Authority over darkness is not granted to those who have studied it from a safe distance. It is forged in the people who have been in its presence and refuse to surrender their confession of who they are. You have watched a light bulb flicker and blow in a room where you were experiencing a spike of spiritual oppression, and your rational mind catalogued it as coincidence because you have been trained to distrust the intelligence of your own experience. But material interference generated by frequency disruption is not a phenomenon that belongs exclusively to horror films and superstitious narratives. It is a documented reality in the lives of people who carry strong spiritual assignments, and it operates on a principle as concrete as electromagnetic interference. Your anointing generates a frequency. When that frequency is under sustained attack, the oppressive spiritual pressure that accumulates in your immediate environment interacts with the electrical and energetic systems around you in ways that produce tangible, measurable material disturbances. Lights fail, electronics malfunction, objects fall without cause, animals respond to presences you cannot yet see. These are not signs that darkness is winning. These are signs that the warfare has escalated because heaven is about to move, and the desperation of the opposition is leaking into the material dimension. The physical sensation when this happens is a sudden atmospheric shift, a change in the air quality of a room that can only be described as a thickening, a sense of pressure arriving from no visible source. The intrusive thought is the voice of rationalism weaponized against your discernment. You are superstitious, you are irrational, you are making connections where none exist. This voice sounds like intelligence, but functions as a suppression mechanism. The spiritual action occurring in moments of material interference is the external expression of an internal battle, your frequency pushing against the oppressive pressure of an assigned spiritual weight that is trying to contain what heaven is in the process of releasing. The primitive memory activated here is the first time you trusted your perception of something invisible and were ridiculed for it by someone whose approval you needed, which taught you to silence the most accurate intelligence you possess. Heaven's testimony in this moment is unambiguous. The material world is responding to a spiritual reality, and the disruption you are witnessing is evidence of a frequency so powerful that it cannot be fully contained in the invisible. The divine promotion is this: you are being trained to read the world at a resolution that the enemy cannot accommodate, because when you learn to interpret material interference as spiritual intelligence, darkness loses one of its primary advantages over you, which is your willingness to explain away its footprints. You have walked into rooms and felt it, not seen it, not been told about it, felt it, a shift in the atmosphere that arrived precisely when a specific person arrived, a heaviness that settled over a space that was light only moments before, a silence that was not peaceful, but charged with something concealed beneath the surface of social performance. Envy has a texture that the spiritually trained can read the way a meteorologist reads atmospheric pressure, not with drama, not with accusation, but with the quiet, functional intelligence of someone whose survival depends on accurate environmental reading. The silence in a room when envy enters is not the silence of indifference. It is the silence of an energy field responding to a foreign frequency, a covetous transmission that disrupts the natural resonance of a space the way a wrong note disrupts a chord. If you have dismissed this perception as ego, you have been cooperating with the enemy's most sophisticated tactical operation against discernment, which is the deployment of humility as a blindfold. Genuine humility does not require you to pretend you cannot feel what you feel. It requires you to hold what you feel without weaponizing it, to use it as intelligence without using it as identity. The physical sensation of entering a space charged with covetous energy is a contraction across the solar plexus, a subtle but unmistakable sense of the air resisting your expansion, a low-grade nausea that has nothing to do with what you ate and everything to do with what the atmosphere is transmitting. The intrusive thought is this: I do not belong here, and everyone in this room can see it. Darkness uses the energetic hostility of envy to confirm the story it has been trying to write about you since your assignment was first identified, which is that you are an outsider, a misfit, someone whose presence is tolerated but never truly welcomed. The spiritual action occurring in these atmospheres is a sustained frequency suppression, a collective agreement, sometimes unconscious, sometimes entirely deliberate, to direct covetous attention toward your signal in a way that attempts to weigh it down. The primitive memory activated is every room in your childhood or early adult life where your arrival was met with a quality of attention that felt more like surveillance than welcome. Heaven's reading of this moment is precise and devastating in its clarity. The room shifts when you enter because you are carrying something that does not belong to the room, something that exceeds the frequency ceiling of that environment. And darkness is not punishing you for being out of place. It is panicking because you arrived. As I teach heavily and deeply to those who arrive at the 3 Keys to a Prosperous Life trilogy, I have already left the link for you in the pinned comment. This weight on your chest is just a symptom of a spiritual transition so significant that the opposition has had to deploy assets it normally reserves for public targets. You were never small. You were hidden, and there is a categorical difference between those two things that will change everything about how you carry yourself from this moment forward. There was someone who knew your language, who spoke into your interior world with a fluency that felt like divine confirmation, who walked beside you through a season that required you to be more vulnerable than you had allowed yourself to be in years, perhaps in a lifetime, and then they moved against you with an intelligence that could only have been built on the architecture of your trust, using the very intimacies you had shared as the weapons of their betrayal. The unexpected betrayal is not simply a relational wound. It is a spiritual ambush, a calculated operation executed by an assignment that has been given access to your life through the vulnerability required for genuine connection, and it targets not only your trust, but your willingness to remain open to the divine connections that heaven is in the process of sending your way. Because if darkness can use a Judas to close the door on your capacity for authentic relationship, then the powerful person heaven is positioning toward you will arrive to find a wall where a door was supposed to be. The physical sensation of betrayal at this depth is a specific kind of cold that starts in the sternum and spreads outward, a nausea that is less about disgust and more about the disorientation of a world that no longer operates according to the rules you trusted. The intrusive thought is the most dangerous thought darkness delivers through this portal. I misjudged someone I was certain about, which means my discernment cannot be trusted, which means every signal I think I am receiving about my assignment, my purpose, my connections, may be equally wrong. This thought is a spiritual neutralizer of the highest order, and darkness deploys it specifically against people whose discernment is in the process of reaching its most powerful calibration. The spiritual action occurring in betrayal is the attempted destruction of your prophetic intelligence, a bid to sever the connection between your spirit's accurate perception and your willingness to act on what you perceive. The primitive memory activated is the first betrayal, the first time someone who should have been safe was revealed as a source of harm, and the lesson your nervous system recorded in that original moment is the template that darkness has been using against you ever since. Heaven's tribunal records every Judas. The spiritual law governing this is not one of retribution, but of revelation. Every betrayal that darkness engineered to collapse your openness has been simultaneously functioning as a divine filtering mechanism, removing from your inner circle the connections that would have become liabilities at the very moment heaven's strategy required your full operational capacity. The divine promotion is this: you are not walking into what is ahead of you with the naivete of someone who has never been hurt. You are walking in with the tested, battle-forged wisdom of someone who knows the weight of a false embrace and can distinguish it without drama and without bitterness from the real thing. The animal responded before you processed what you were feeling. The dog that lives in your space, or perhaps an animal you encountered in a moment that now carries more meaning than you initially assigned it, began reacting to a person in a way that was disproportionate to any visible provocation. A low, sustained growl, a refusal to approach, a repositioning of the body between you and the source of its attention. You dismissed it because the human being standing there was presenting all the socially acceptable signals of safety and warmth, and because you have been taught that animals react to surface cues and that their intelligence does not exceed the immediately physical. But the spiritual biology of an animal's perception operates at a frequency that the narcissistic mask cannot penetrate, because the mask is a cognitive construction, and cognitive constructions do not broadcast in the frequency range that animal nervous systems read. What the animal reads is the energetic signature of the entity operating behind the persona, and what it communicated to you in that moment of inexplicable agitation was intelligence of the highest accuracy. The physical sensation of watching an animal react to a spiritual threat is a peculiar combination of cognitive dissonance and a deep bodily recognition, as if your nervous system and the animals are briefly sharing the same channel, and your body receives the signal that your mind is still negotiating. The intrusive thought is the rationalization that follows. I should not read into this. Animals behave unpredictably. I am projecting my own discomfort onto the animal's reaction. And darkness benefits enormously from your willingness to override the most reliable intelligence delivery system in your immediate environment. The spiritual action in this moment is a dual operation. The entity operating through the person your animal identified is generating a frequency that triggers the animal's threat response, while simultaneously relying on your socialized rationalism to override the warning. The primitive memory activated here is every moment in your life when you trusted an external social consensus over your own internal signal, and were later forced to reconcile the cost of that override with a wound that took years to process. Heaven placed the animal in your path as a witness, a biological instrument, calibrated to the frequency range where masks do not function, and the divine promotion embedded in this moment is the permission and the mandate to stop requiring visible evidence before you trust what your spirit has already registered. You looked at the time and it said 11:11. And you paused, not because you decided to take it seriously, but because something in you took it seriously before your decision was involved. Or it was 3:33. Or it was the same sequence appearing in your life across contexts, too varied and too consistent to belong to confirmation bias. These numerical convergences are not a mystical language invented by people who need patterns to feel safe in a random universe. They are a navigational system, and the part of you that responds to them before your rationalism arrives is the part of you that has never forgotten the language of heaven, the part that was present before the cultural conditioning that told you meaning had to be earned through linear logic and visible proof. The physical sensation of encountering a significant numerical alignment is a quiet but unmistakable interior recognition, like a sound that only one instrument in an orchestra can respond to, and your spirit is that instrument. The intrusive thought that follows is the voice of the world's consensus. This is coincidence. You are pattern seeking. You are assigning significance to data that carries none. But that voice, regardless of how sophisticated it sounds, is the voice of a frequency cut off from its source, and it has been deployed against your supernatural intelligence as part of the broader strategy to make you operate exclusively within the bounds of the visible. The spiritual action occurring in numerical alignment is a direct communication from the navigational intelligence of heaven, a checkpoint in the midst of your journey that confirms your coordinates, that tells you the path you are on is the path, even when the path looks nothing like what you expected the journey to feel. The primitive memory activated here is the first time you knew something you could not have known. The first time your interior intelligence delivered information that your exterior environment had not yet confirmed. And the specific look on someone's face when you shared that knowing, and they looked at you like you had said something that frightened them. Heaven uses number sequences to speak to the ones it has taken off the conventional communication grid, to reach through the noise of an ordinary day and confirm that the operation is still running, that the timeline is intact, that you have not been forgotten in the wilderness. The divine promotion embedded in every numerical confirmation is the gradual rebuilding of your trust in an intelligence that operates above the frequency range of human strategy. A trust that will be essential when the powerful person heaven has been preparing arrives at the threshold of your life, and everything about the encounter requires you to move in a direction that cannot be justified on paper. You broke through, not with applause, not with a witness, not with the validation of someone whose approval would have completed the moment in the way your wound always imagined it needed to be completed. You broke through alone, in a room or a moment or a season where the only audience was the version of yourself who had not believed this was possible. And that version watched in silence as you crossed the line that every assignment of darkness had been designed to keep you on the wrong side of. And instead of the euphoria you expected, you felt something quieter and more devastating in its purity. A grief without a name, a joy too large for the container of a single celebration, and tears that arrived not from sadness, but from the recognition that the journey to this moment had required something from you that you can never fully explain to someone who did not walk it. The solitary victory is one of the most spiritually significant experiences a chosen one can have, because it strips the achievement of every false motivation that performance and approval-seeking attach to success. When no one is watching, when the win produces no external validation, what remains is the absolute clarity of why you were built for this. And that clarity is the purest form of divine confirmation available to a human being. The physical sensation of the solitary victory is a specific quality of exhaustion that is simultaneously a release, like a body finally allowed to set down a weight it has been carrying for longer than it recognized. The intrusive thought is the question that darkness delivers into the silence of an unwitnessed triumph. If it happens and no one sees it, does it count? This question is the last-ditch attempt of an assignment that has already failed to rob your victory of its spiritual authority by convincing you that its value depends on an audience. The spiritual action occurring in the moment of solitary victory is a direct endorsement from heaven, a transfer of spiritual currency into your account that no human witness is required to authorize. The primitive memory activated is every moment of invisible effort, every season of building in obscurity, every achievement that the people positioned to celebrate it either missed or minimized, and the compounded grief of a lifetime of wins that felt incomplete because the right eyes were never watching. Heaven's tribunal does not require a human audience. Every isolated victory was